Hi everyone, in today's video we're going to be talking about language development. So let's get started with the 6 aspects of language that are important to consider. The first two, phonetics and phonology, those are not going to be discussed primarily in today's lecture, although they're two important aspects because they do come a little bit earlier and develop than around the preschool years, which we're discussing in this lecture. But be sure to check out these two videos and you can learn about the difference between phonetics, which are physically producing speech sounds, and phonology, which are speech sounds that actually have meaning, so such as a sound and how it has meaning that implies what the words are. So what we're going to be talking about today are the next ones. So morphology, which is the vocabulary that words use, syntax, which is the grammar or putting sentences together, semantics or discourse, which is the purpose of sentences. So basically we're trying to convey information like asking a question or doing an exclamatory statement. So where are you going? Oh my goodness, I see. So exclamatory statements or asking questions that show excitement related to the discourse. And then finally we have pragmatics, which is how language is used with another. So turn taking, interrupting somebody, those kind of things would be related to pragmatics. There are three main theories that are connected to language development: nativist, or the nature side, behaviorist, or the nurture side, and then the sociolinguistic, which is a combination of both nature and nurture. And so when we're thinking about nativist theories, we are seeing Noam Chomsky and how language acquisition, ooh, that was a mouthful for me. The language acquisition device that he talks about is basically how our brain is pre-wired to acquire speech, and that we already come into the world with a set system and we're ready to go to be able to acquire new language. And so this is picked up on very quickly when we're paying attention to language. So specifically, we're thinking about making speech sounds very early on, the grammar rules in the way that infants and children are mimicking somebody else's speech. So we think about a child and how they might say, I go to the pool. Although they haven't heard anyone mimic the word goad, it would actually be I went to the pool, which is appropriate in the English language. They are taking that ED rule and applying it liberally, which seems to indicate that there is some innate language structure to be picked up on, and that there are rules of language that are already pre-wired and predetermined. And then with the behaviorist view, we're thinking about speech that we are replicating things and we've learned them in our environment. So the nativist is we are already born with pre-wired predisposition aspects of language. And then with behaviorists, we are gaining language information and speech from our environment. So there seems to be some truth to this in that language use, we generally model the correct uses of language, and over time we are accustomed to the different types of rules that we use, and we are acquiring appropriate uses of language. So we say mama, mama, dada, dada. And so we're listening to the pronunciation of speech sounds and how we refer through imitation. And so there's reinforcement over and over again with mama or dada. So we are repeatedly saying sounds and enunciating words, and also being able to read lips and seeing how our mouths move. And so the way that we use, again, that aspect of phonetics and phonology, which was discussed on the previous slide, that comes into play. And then sociolinguistic theory is connected to the maturation over time. So the combination of both pre-wired language and also feedback within our social environment to create an abundance of language across time. So I would recommend taking a peek at the video that I've listed here, and it does a good job of explaining all three of these theories. It's very brief, but it helps you to get an understanding of them in connection to one another. Now we're going to be talking about different milestones from the Learning Foundation. So on this slide, we're going to be talking about vocabulary, and then we'll talk about grammar, and then finally we'll talk about discourse and pragmatics. So at around age 3, we typically expect children to be able to be basically understandable by most adults and older children. And so at around age 3, if we're still not able to distinguish what children are trying to say through their language, we may need to check in and see if additional speech services might be supportive and help children to gain basic words or pronounce certain aspects of those phonetics and phonology, that there could be some areas that need support around age 3 if we're not seeing that children are understandable in their vocabulary. And then by around age 4, children should be able to use basic words that are generally accepted for actions, objects, and attributes about the world. So one example of this might be a couch. Most people have a couch in their home, and so if you refer to a couch as a couch, then you would expect your child around the age 4 to also be able to refer to the couch as a couch and use that word. Now, depending on the different languages that are spoken in the house, if we're thinking about a child who is bilingual and they refer to a chair as a chair or a silla, we know that both of these terms would be appropriate uses of vocabulary for the same object. And then we can also see that children around the age of 4 should be able to use relational kinds of words, so up, down, on, over, beside, between, in between. And if you look at the YouTube video here, it gives you a nice sense of different aspects of relational words and how they should be used commonly. And then at around age 5, this is when children should start to use various words for objects, actions, and attributes. So again, just an increase of what we would see at around age 4. Their basic words are used for those objects, but now we're seeing some variety in that. So we'll go back to the example of the couches, but there's many different ways that we might describe couches and different types of couches. So depending on the era that you have grown up in or the part of the world that you grow up in, there's different uses for the word couch. So Davenports are often used in different time periods. We also might refer to a couch that can hold 2 people as a love seat because it's smaller, and so it's meant for 2 people to be sitting on it. And so this would be a more specific way to describe a couch, so that object, action, or attribute. And children are now able to expand on the relationship of the word instead of using more simple, complex context. They have more complexity in their words and adding more relational terms to their vocabulary. Looking at grammar, we are looking at a few different things. So remember, grammar is the way that we are putting sentences together. And so at around age 3, children should be able to make simple sentences. So they're able to put about 7 to 10 words together per sentence, maybe a little bit less, but definitely being able to put together simple sentences. And they should be able to use grammar rules of their home language. So for example, in English, we put the adjective before the noun. In the example, the red dog, but in Spanish, the adjective comes after the noun. So the red dog would be el perro rojo. And so children should be able to use these different grammatical rules that they've been hearing over the past 3 years in their home language. And then around ages 4 to 5, children should be able to make longer and more complex sentences, so combining 2 to 3 word phrases. So an example of this might be, my mom went to the store and she'll be coming back after, or she'll be coming back soon. And so they're combining different phrases. My mom went to the store and she'll be coming back soon. Another one, I like dogs and I want to get that one. So I like dogs, I want to get that one. I'm putting those 2 phrases and I'm combining them together and I'm using different concepts and sentences. So putting different ideas together, they should be able to use quite a bit of age-appropriate grammar and have subject-verb agreements, so things should line up together so that you know the past and the present tense using plurals correctly. And then we're thinking about there's a lot of irregular past tense, so lots of very sophisticated grammar we would be expecting to see from ages 4 to 5, which is actually quite remarkable since children have only been speaking for a few years. And last but not least, let's talk about discourse and pragmatics. So just as a reminder, pragmatics is how we use language with one another, so being able to communicate. And discourse is how we convey information such as questions or statements with excitement. So let's think about our 3-year-olds first. So around 3 years old, we would expect children to be able to engage in back and forth conversations with a number of terms. So typically children want to talk about what they're interested in, and the other person or adult would talk about what they do and go back and forth. And we see this with lots of turn taking, and typically adults are helping children to be repetitive. So the child might say, I go to the store. Oh, I see. Yes, you went to the store earlier. Do you remember what we did at the store? And then the child might elaborate a little bit more. I saw a puppy at the store, or I saw toys, or maybe I went to grandma's. So maybe I'm, as the adult, asking back and forth questions or providing explanations. So again, just engaging in basic back and forth conversations. And then around 4 to 5 years old, children should be able to use language to communicate in familiar social situations. So at school and at home, really wherever they're comfortable with, people that they're comfortable around. They should be able to start to use language and also communicate in unfamiliar situations by around 60 months. And so when children are around 5, their language use can help them to construct a short narrative and tell short stories. And so the video here shows a little boy telling a narrative and telling you a story, so you can see kind of what that looks like for a 5-year-old. I did want to talk a little bit about bilingualism because in our country, and particularly in the state of California, we see a strong prevalence of bilingualism, the ability to speak and understand 2 languages, or multilingualism, which is being able to speak and understand more than 2 languages. And the information that is on this slide is from the Kids Count Data Center. And so just wanted to share some information because in the United States, and again, like I said, particularly in California, it's extremely common to work with preschool age children in classroom settings or in other settings who are bilingual or currently learning a second language. And so it's important to consider and think about how you as the caretaker or teacher can support the child in your classroom and help them to be able to reap the benefits of bilingualism, which we'll talk about more on the next slide. And so this is just some data to show how many children in the United States and California speak more than one language. As I was mentioning on the previous slide, it's important that we do our best to support children who speak more than one language. And although there has been some controversy regarding being able to be bilingual or multilingual, I'm excited to move into an era where we are realizing the importance of being able to speak more than one language, and that there are so many positive aspects, and we are encouraging and integrating school systems and programs where children are introduced to more than one language early on. And so if this is not something that you're exposed to at home, there are schools where you can go and they are fully bilingual, and children have really a head start on the wonderful opportunity of being able to have a multitude of benefits through being bilingual and multilingual. And so we see that children are better able to solve problems. Being bilingual or multilingual is associated with increased abilities to concentrate and focus, and having mental flexibility in that aspect of focus, and of course increasing cultural competence. So knowing more about our global community and having the ability to speak more than one language helps you to build stronger connections in different places and with families, and helps to provide access to a multitude of jobs, because many times in the world, jobs are looking for somebody who can speak more than one language. And again, this information from this slide and the previous slide are pulled from the Kids Count Data Center. And then I would also encourage you to watch the TED Talk just to show how being multilingual and bilingual benefit children and human beings in many different ways. So in this slide, I just wanted to share a little bit of information about the stages of second language learners. So although not everybody is born into a household where they have the opportunity to learn more than one language, many times we see children who are becoming bilingual in their school settings. And so their first language at home has already been solidified, and now in their school they're learning a second or even a third language. And so they'll continue to use their home language while simultaneously learning a second language at school. And so just keep in mind when looking at this chart, we're not looking at months and years in terms of how old a child actually is, but the months and years are connected to the stages in which a child is learning the second language. On this side, we're going to be talking about some ways to help facilitate language development. So for children who are bilingual, and specifically also children who might be needing additional supports or have delays in language development, we'd want to make sure that we are creating supportive environments and really focusing on all of these key aspects. But in general, all of these points are going to be beneficial to support children's language development. And so the first thing is making sure that we're using child-centered language. So this does not mean that we're using baby talk or talking down to children. So you don't need to use made-up words or made-up phrases. And you can use typical adult vocabulary and big words with children. And really just focusing on what children are interested in and what they'd like to talk to in order to be able to discuss particular topics. So there's many different things that children might be interested in, and we can also help them to understand relevant information and context about their environment as they're getting older. And so increasing the amount of words that you use helps children to produce a wide variety of vocabulary in their language. So remember, you can use big words with children in order to help create meaning for them. And this is child-centered language. And so this gives children the ability to have, again, a vast vocabulary and allows them to think about things in different ways. So if we are making things interesting, children are more likely to pay attention and focus in on what we are discussing. And then, of course, we want to make sure we are providing meaningful discourse to children about things that they can actually see and touch. So tangible discourse and discussion is going to help children to be able to create relevancy in their experiences that they're having and connect to what we're discussing. And so again, that back and forth conversation is really important. The use of elaborations and questions, as we were discussing earlier. So not just talking at children, but we're talking with children. And so we can see on page 314 and 315, it shows a nice conversation where there's elaborative discussion that uses open-ended questions. So elaborating on the conversations that we're providing children and really thinking about that back and forth piece, that pragmatics again as a way to help children to engage in conversation with others. And we're not just talking at them, but we're actually having active engagement and language and helping to elevate the conversation between you and the child. So take a peek at that. So thinking about for a 1-year-old, that aspect of elaborating and providing open-ended questions. So I might say, oh, you have a red car. So I'm elaborating on, a child might be holding a car and they might not know that the car is red. Or I say, I see that you have a red car in your right hand and a blue car in your left hand. That's so interesting. You have 2 cars. So I might be providing a lot of new information with colors and size, or the different types of cars that the child has. I could be talking about that. So there's lots that I could add to the conversation, but maybe I'm talking to a child who's 4 or 5 and they already know the difference between red and blue and they understand right and left. And so my ability to create a meaningful and expansive conversation where I elaborate on what the child might not know, I would need to add more than just red and blue. So maybe I can tune into what the child's interested in, and maybe they love sports cars. And so I say, oh, wow, I see that you have a red car and a blue car. I know that when I see cars, I see red cars that go extremely fast, and I wonder how fast your car can go. So we might be getting into some higher cognitive thought and allowing the child to think about, how fast would the red car go in comparison to the blue car? And I wonder if the color of the car makes a difference in how fast they go. So I'm not only elaborating on the language development, but then I'm helping to create a more advanced conversation. And I might ask the child those questions to see what they think. Which car do you think is going to go faster if we put them down the ramp, the red one or the blue one? So I'm asking inquiry and allowing the child to go back and forth with me using those open-ended questions. And then as we discussed, thinking about children who are bilingual and multilingual and how to prevent stages that children go through with being respectful. So on 316 to 320, we want to respect and support our dual language learners. And so I've also included the video here that has some good tips. And then finally, we want to be on the lookout, looking at the pages 321 to 325 of children who might need additional support. So if there are potential problems related to language, we want to be tuning into that and making sure that we are paying attention for children who might experience speech and language difficulties and trying to identify those problems as early on as possible so that we can best support children. And so your text on those pages gives you some information in early childhood settings related to language development, and also this article here at the very bottom of your slide gives you some more information related to speech, language, and hearing disorders. So this is all I have for you for today's lecture. Make sure, if you haven't already, to kind of take a peek at the knowledge checks on slide 15 as well as on slide 5. So slide 5 and slide 15 have those knowledge checks for you. And I hope you all have a wonderful day or evening whenever you're listening to and or watching this. And I will talk to you in the next lecture. Bye, everyone. Thank you.